She was nobody, a tired waitress in borrowed shoes, invisible in a world that never once looked her way. Until the night she threw herself onto broken glass for a child she didn't know, belonging to a man she should have feared. One heartbeat, three steps, and suddenly the most dangerous man in the city was looking at her like she was the only thing in the room worth protecting. She didn't save a little boy that night. She saved herself. Welcome to a channel where power meets love, where mafia bosses discover what truly makes them human, and where family messy, fierce, and unbreakable always wins. This story reminds us that true courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing someone else over your own safety, and finding that the world you stumbled into was the one you always belonged in. If this story moves you, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us what you'd have done in her place. Share it with someone who loves a story about unexpected love. And subscribe, because we have so many more nights like this one waiting for you.
I remember the rain that night, how it beat against the giant windows at Aurelio's. It was like it was trying to get into the warmth, a feeling I never quite felt myself. I'd float through that dining room, trying my best to stay invisible. The shiny marble floors reflected the fancy lights, making it look like I was walking on stars. But my feet knew better, aching after 12-hour days in shoes I'd pieced together with a prayer. "Table 7 is out of water," Marcus snapped, breezing by me in his perfect uniform. We wore the same thing, but on me, it always looked like a costume, just temporary. I'd just nod and go, always trying to keep up in a world that wasn't built for me. The crystal pitcher was heavy in my hand, and cold. It was sweating in my grip as I walked toward table 7. That's when my eyes landed on them. The corner booth, the one they saved for people whose names you read about in the papers. And not for the best reasons, you know? 3 men sat there in a cloud of smoke and shadows, wearing suits that cost more than I made in a year. No one ever told them they couldn't smoke in there, of course. Nobody was brave enough. But it wasn't them who took my breath away. It was the little boy. He couldn't have been more than 5, his legs just swinging at the edge of the seat, happy in a way only a child can be, not knowing the kind of world his father ran. He had these dark curls and was making quiet car noises with a little toy. That sound, somehow I heard it over everything else. I knew I should have just looked away and kept to my job, stayed unseen. But seeing his innocence stirred up something deep inside me, a painful kind of longing. I used to dream of that, you know? A child, a family, a life that wasn't just about tips and rent. Michael took that dream from me when he walked out, leaving me with apologies as fake as the ring he sold. The woman at table 7, celebrating her anniversary, tapped her glass. I had to force a smile as I poured their water, my hands steady only from doing it 1,000 times before. They didn't even see me. I was just part of the room. As I started to walk away, I heard it. A loud, sharp crack. Then, a woman screamed. It came from the table right behind me, not the corner one with the dangerous men, but the next one over. A waitress, Sophie, was there, holding a tray full of champagne glasses. Everything went into slow motion. Sophie's heel had caught on a wrinkle in the carpet that no one had noticed. That big tray started to go. The glasses caught the light as they fell, like deadly little stars, and they were heading right for the corner booth, right for that little boy. He just looked up, his eyes huge, his toy car stopped in its tracks. He was too little to know he should move. The men with him were starting to react, but they weren't fast enough, not for a boy sitting right in the path of all that falling glass. I didn't even have a thought. That was a luxury I couldn't afford. My body just reacted. It was pure instinct, the same thing that had gotten me through so much already. I dropped the heavy pitcher and water went everywhere as I dove. It was only 3 steps. That's all it took to go from being no one to being someone they'd never forget. I covered that little boy with my own body, a shield against that shimmering rain of glass. I felt him underneath me as I curled up, my back to the storm. The first piece of glass hit my shoulder. It was a hot, sharp pain that made it hard to breathe. Then another hit, and another. It was a symphony of breaking crystal. I could feel the champagne soaking my uniform, mixing with something much warmer, my own blood. The little boy was crying under me, but I just held on tighter, taking every hit for him. Every piece of glass felt like it was planting a star of pure agony in my back. And then it was quiet. Well, not really quiet. The whole restaurant was in an uproar, but the falling glass had stopped. I stayed right where I was, curled over the child, shaking all over. "Don't move." The voice that spoke was deep and dark, with this beautiful Italian accent. "Matteo, are you okay?" The boy, Matteo, whimpered a little but said, "No, Papa." Papa. Oh heavens, what had I done? I remember thinking, what trouble have I jumped into now? Strong hands took hold of my shoulders, very gentle, trying not to hurt me more. "Look at me," the voice ordered. And even though every part of me wanted to run and hide, I did. I looked up. I had to hide, to vanish, but I raised my head. The man kneeling there took what little breath I had left. He had that kind of beauty that dangerous things do, a sharp jaw, dark eyes that seemed to hold entire worlds, and a thin scar that ran from his eyebrow up into his hair. His suit was perfect, even in all that mess, a dark blue that probably cost a fortune. But his eyes, that's what got me. They weren't cold like I expected from a man like that. They were burning with something I couldn't place. It was an intensity that, for the first time in forever, made me feel completely and utterly seen. "You're bleeding," he stated, and it wasn't a question. His eyes moved from my face to the glass sticking out of my shoulder. It looked like some kind of awful brooch, and his face changed. A flicker of pure rage crossed it, so strong you could almost feel it in the air. "I'm okay," I whispered, but we both knew it was a lie. Is Matteo?" "You said his name." His dark eyes narrowed, studying me so closely it felt like I was being taken apart. "How did you know his name?" "I heard you," I stammered. "I just heard you say it." Everything was starting to hurt so much. I'd broken my biggest rule: never, ever get noticed. "Papa, she saved me," Matteo said then. He had wiggled out from under me and was reaching for my face with his little hands. The glass was going to hit me, and she jumped. The man, his papa, was perfectly still, his hands still on me, and I could feel the tension coming off him in waves. The whole restaurant was silent. Sophie was sobbing somewhere in the background. Marcus had shown up with a first aid kit, but was just standing there, maybe 3 feet away, too scared to come any closer without being told to, without permission from the man whose son I'd just protected. "What is your name?" he asked, and the way he said it, I knew I couldn't refuse. "Elena," I breathed out. "Elena Santos." "Elena." He said my name so slowly, like he was tasting it, and hearing him say it, it became something else, something important and fragile, and his. "I am Dante Moretti." The name just dropped into the room. I saw the recognition on everyone's faces, the older staff, the manager who suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost, and the few customers who knew exactly what that name meant. Moretti. The family that ran the city's darker side, with just enough clean businesses to look respectable. A name you only heard in whispers and careful newspaper stories. I had just thrown myself on top of the son of the most feared man in the city. I should help clean," I tried, wanting to get away, but his hand on my shoulder wouldn't let me. "You need a doctor," he said. "Marco." He didn't even raise his voice, but one of his men was right there, phone in hand. "Get Dr. Russo, have him meet us at the house, and find out who is responsible for this." He waved a hand at the mess, at poor Sophie. "An accident." The way he said that word told me he didn't believe it for a second. "Sir, I can just go to an emergency room. I have insurance." "Kind of, But the lie just faded as Dante let go of me to stand up. He seemed to fill the whole room. "You saved my son," he said, his voice low, and I swear everyone leaned in to listen. "You put yourself in the way of danger for a child you did not even know. Everything you had before this moment, your plans, your worries, your whole life, it's all different now. You see, Elena Santos, I always pay my debts." He looked right into my eyes then, and his gaze was a beautiful, inescapable trap. "And this is one debt I will take a very long time to repay." It was meant to sound like he was grateful, I guess. But to me, it felt like a warning, a promise, and something far more complicated than either. Behind him, Matteo was just smiling at me, clutching his little car, with no idea that his father's words had just wrapped around my life like silken chains. The glass in my back was throbbing with my own heartbeat, reminding me that I had been seen, and I had been claimed. A person whose notice could be far more lethal than being ignored. Dante offered his hand to help me up, and I remember just looking at it. Slender fingers, a platinum watch catching the light, and a ring with a crest I didn't know. Taking it felt like stepping over a line I could never go back across. But what else could I do? I'd already crashed into his world. Now his world was wrapping itself around me, broken glass and all. I put my shaking hand in his, and his fingers closed over mine like a lock clicking shut, or maybe a cage door. The leather seats in Dante's car, honey, they smelled of wealth and peril. Rich, deep, with a hint of cologne that cost more than my rent used to. Used to, because I was pretty sure my job at Aurelio's was a thing of the past after I bled all over their fancy floor and ruined their big night. I sat stiffly in the back, so aware of Matteo huddled against my good side, his little hand gripping my torn uniform. Dante was across from us in that huge car, turned towards me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The man he called Marco was driving, quiet and professional, stealing glances in the rear-view mirror with an unreadable look. Another man, built like a brick wall and scarred, sat up front. That was Luca, speaking quickly into a phone in Italian. I only caught bits and pieces, something about the accident, the girl, the boy. "Does it hurt?" Matteo's voice was so small in that tense quiet. "A little," I lied. A little was being very kind. My back felt like a cat had used it for a scratching post. Every tiny move was a new wave of pain. But something about that little boy's worry made me want to be strong for him, to show him that not all help came with a hidden cost he'd have to pay. I was already starting to think my own bill was going to be enormous. "You're very brave," Matteo said, his dark eyes, just like his father's, looking at me with this strange focus. "Like the heroes in my books. Are you a hero?" "No, sweet boy. I'm just a waitress who has excellent instincts." Dante's voice sliced in, smooth as silk, "and poor self-preservation." He hadn't taken his eyes off me since we got in the car, and his stare made me feel exposed and trapped all at once. Most people would have looked away, decided it wasn't their business. Why didn't you? The question just hung there. I could feel the trap in it, knew my answer could say too much, but I was so tired and hurt that all my usual caution was gone, leaving just the simple truth. "He's just a child," I said softly. That was reason enough. I saw a flicker in Dante's eyes, maybe surprise, maybe something else. "Do you have children of your own?" "No." The word came out sharp, full of old disappointments and a future that vanished when Michael left. "No children, no family. Just me," he repeated, and the way he said it made it sound less like being alone and more like an opportunity. "So no one will be worried that you're not home tonight." The chill of that question went right through me. "I should call my landlord, tell him I'll be late with the rent again." "Your rent is paid." He pulled out his phone, his thumbs flying. "For the next year. Think of it as the first payment on my debt." My throat went dry. "You can't. That's not. I don't even know how much." "Irrelevant." He put the phone away, his eyes locked on mine. You took a blow meant for my son. No amount of money can truly repay that, but I intend to try. Your rent is handled. You will never see a medical bill. Your boss at Aurelios was told you're on a paid leave of absence, indefinitely. So I'm fired, I translated, the bitterness sharp in my mouth. You're being protected, Dante corrected, and there was steel under that smooth voice. What happened tonight was not an accident, Elena. Someone wanted to harm my son. You stood between him and that danger, which means he leaned forward, and the big car suddenly felt tiny. Whoever did this will see you as a helper or a witness. Both are very dangerous things to be. Fear, cold and sharp, finally cut through the pain. What are you saying? I'm saying that your quiet, invisible life, the one you've worn, like a suit of armor, is over. Everyone in that restaurant saw you save Matteo. By morning, anyone who matters will know your name, your face, and your tie to my family. His jaw clenched. I can't give you back your old life, but I can offer you my protection. The only question is, if you are smart enough to take it. The car slipped through gates that opened on their own, up a drive bordered by perfect hedges and little security cameras that looked like garden lights. The house was something out of a magazine I could never afford. It was all modern lines softened with classic Italian touches, stone, glass, and old-world grace in a new-world fortress. A fortress I was being brought into. I don't understand what's happening, I whispered, mostly to myself. This morning I woke up in my little studio, worried about tips and rent and my broken refrigerator. Now I'm in a car with... I stopped, remembering Matteo was right there, listening. A child shouldn't hear these things. With someone who owes you everything, Dante finished for me, his voice low, and who always pays his debts, Elena. Always. The car stopped by the front door, where a man in a white coat was waiting with a medical kit. Dr. Russo, I guessed. Marco opened my door and offered me a hand, and I was too numb to say no. The second I tried to stand, my legs gave out. The adrenaline was gone, leaving only the pain and the shock. But Dante was there in a flash, his arm hooking around my waist, holding me up with a gentleness that didn't fit with all the stories about the Moretti family. He smelled of fine clothes and something darker, gunpowder maybe, or just that metallic scent of danger that clings to men who live in the dark. I can walk, I said, but my voice was so weak. Just humor me. His breath was warm in my hair, and I hated that my body reacted, that even through the pain I could feel the solid strength of him, the power he held back under that suit. Inside, the house was just as intimidating as I'd expected, all marble and dark wood, with paintings that were worth more than my whole life. A woman in her 60s appeared, looking stern in a black dress and pearls. Her eyes went wide when she saw the state of me. "Oh my," she breathed. "Dante, what?" "Matteo is fine, Ani. This is Elena. She saved him." Dante led me down a hall, the doctor right behind us. "Get the blue guest room ready. She'll be staying with us for a while." What? No, I can't. The panic finally punched through my shock. I have to work. I have... What you have, Dante cut in, guiding me into a room that was nicer than any hotel I'd ever seen, is multiple cuts, probably with glass still in your back, and shock that's about to hit you like a truck in 10 minutes. What you need is a doctor and rest. You can argue with me tomorrow when you're not bleeding. He helped me sit on the edge of a huge bed with sheets so soft they felt like water. Then he stepped back for Dr. Russo, but he didn't go. He just leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching with that same unnerving focus. "I'll need to take her shirt off," Dr. Russo said softly. I could feel my face get hot, despite everything. "I'll turn around," Dante said, but he didn't leave. And I knew, somehow, it was pointless to argue. The doctor helped me out of my ruined uniform, so careful around the glass sticking out of my skin. I heard him suck in a breath, felt his fingers gently probing, and I tried not to make a sound with each new stab of pain. 15 cuts, Dr. Russo announced, talking to Dante, I suppose. 3 pieces of glass still in there. She's lucky. Nothing vital was hit, but there will be scars. Make them as small as you can. Dante's voice was flat, controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering underneath it. Whatever it takes, any specialists you need. I'll do my best, the doctor promised. This is going to hurt, he warned me. I have to get the glass out before I can stitch you up. I just nodded, gripping the bedsheets, trying to brace myself for what was coming. But then, I felt warm fingers wrap around my hand. Dante had moved without a sound. He was kneeling by the bed now, his hand completely covering mine, and his touch was surprisingly gentle. Look at me, he said, his voice quiet. Not at what he's doing, at me. I looked into his eyes, those deep, dark eyes that held a world of secrets I couldn't even guess at, and I tried to hold on as the doctor started to work. Tell me about yourself, Elena Santos, Dante said, his thumb making little circles on the back of my hand. It was a distraction I needed so badly. Where are you from? Here, I gasped out as the first piece of glass was pulled free, a hot flash of pain spreading across my shoulder. Born in the city, East Side. Your parents? I had to stop to breathe. Your parents? He pushed gently, his hand tightening on mine. Dead. A car crash when I was 19. Been on my own ever since. The words just tumbled out, pulled loose by the pain and the strange comfort of his touch. Worked my way through community college. Had to drop out when I ran out of money. Been a waitress since then. And before tonight, what did you want? It was such a strange question. He asked me that, with this sincerity that made me feel like my answer truly mattered. I remember biting my lip, trying to hold back tears as another piece of glass was pulled out. I wanted to be someone important, someone people would remember. Sounds silly, doesn't it? The girl who hid from the world suddenly wanting to be its center. He said it wasn't silly at all, but universal. That we all want our lives to mean something. He built an empire. I saved a child. Then he asked which of us history would remember more kindly. It was so genuine, I almost laughed. Are you really asking for my judgment? I said. But he corrected me. No, I'm asking you to see me. Really see him, not the name. He saw me, he said. And I think that was the moment he realized what he'd stumbled upon. His words didn't scare me then. They felt like a warm brand, marking me as his, just as surely as the scars Dr. Russo was stitching up. All finished, the doctor said, bandaging me with an expert's ease. Keep this area clean and dry, and come back in a week. He looked over at Dante, hesitating a bit. And try to take it easy for a few days. The stitches need to heal. Dante promised him I wouldn't be going anywhere, rising from his chair with this incredible grace he had. Thank you, Antonio, he said. Marco will see you out. After the doctor left, the room suddenly felt huge and tiny all at once. I was just sitting there on the bed in my bra and pants, my back covered in bandages, feeling more vulnerable than I ever had in my life. Dante went to a dresser and pulled out this beautiful silk shirt. Arms up, he told me. I tried to say I could dress myself, but he just said, indulge me. He knelt down in front of me, so gently guiding my arms into the sleeves it took my breath away. His fingers moved so slowly on those buttons, his knuckles brushing my collarbone. Every touch felt like he was staking a claim. Why are you being like this? I whispered. Why do you even care? His hand stopped on that last button, and he looked right at me, so close I could see little gold flecks in his eyes and feel his warm breath. Because you jumped, he said, just like that. No hesitation. You didn't know who we were. You didn't think about the cost. You just did it. He asked if I knew how rare that was. True selflessness. He'd spent his life around people who weighed every single action. And then there I was, a total stranger, throwing myself on broken glass for his son. How could I not care about a person like that? He asked. His words felt just like that silk shirt, soft and impossible to escape. I don't fit in this world, I told him. I needed him to know that I didn't understand its rules or what was expected of me. I'll only let you down, I said, but he just touched my face, his thumb so gentle on my cheekbone. You already exceeded every expectation just by breathing, he said. Sleep now. We'll talk about your new life tomorrow. But for tonight, you are safe, I promise. Safe. It was a funny word. It should have been a comfort. But as I watched him leave, closing the door so quietly, I wondered if safety in his world was just a prettier word for a cage. And the strangest part, honey, was that the thought didn't scare me nearly as much as it should have. I woke up to sunshine in a room I didn't know, with a feeling like my back was on fire. Every single breath was a new sharp pain from the stitches. Every tiny shift was a little reminder that yesterday was very real. The glass, the blood, and that dark-eyed man who had carried me into his fortress and told me my debt was his. The clock said 10:47 a.m. I'd slept for 13 hours straight. The panic set in right away. My shift at Aurelio's started at 6. Marcus would be so mad. I'd miss out on my tips. I would lose my... And then it hit me. There was no more Aurelio's. No more being invisible. My old normal was gone. A quiet knock on the door pulled me out of my thoughts. Miss Santos? A woman's voice called out, a little cautious. May I come in? I managed a yes, pulling the silk sheets higher even though I was wearing his shirt. The door opened, and it was the woman from the night before, Agnes. She was carrying a tray with coffee, fruit, and pastries that smelled absolutely divine. Her face seemed a little softer than I remembered, but her eyes still looked so tired. Mr. Moretti wanted me to bring you some breakfast, she said, putting the tray down beside me. And to let you know Dr. Russo is coming this afternoon to check on your back. She paused for a moment. He also wanted me to show you the wardrobe he had sent over this morning. Wardrobe? I repeated, feeling foolish. Agnes just walked over to the closet and opened the doors, and my jaw dropped. There must have been thousands of dollars in clothes. Jeans, dresses, everything. And all in my size. There were rows of shoes, from sneakers to heels I'd never be brave enough to wear. How did he... When did he... I couldn't even form the words. It was all too much. Mr. Moretti can be very efficient when he's motivated, Agnes said with a dry little twist to her lips. He had his people working all night. She told me if anything didn't fit, a tailor could come back. As she was leaving, she stopped. He's asked to see you when you feel up to it. No rush, he said. She almost smiled then. He's been checking on you every hour since sunrise. Mateo, too. That little boy is quite fond of you. After she'd gone, I just sat there in that giant bed, staring at a closet of clothes I never asked for, in a house that wasn't mine. Every part of me wanted to run, to just grab my old ruined uniform and walk right out of there. But I kept hearing Dante's words from last night. Someone wanted to hurt my son. You put yourself between him and that harm. If he was right, if it wasn't an accident, then running away might be the most dangerous thing I could do. I'd been noticed, tied to the Morettis, whether I liked it or not. You'd think that would have terrified me. But honestly, it was almost a relief to finally matter to someone. To be seen, even if it meant I was a captive. Goodness, what was wrong with me? I took a shower, being careful with my back, and then put on a pair of jeans and a soft sweater that fit like a glove. Of course they did. Dante Moretti never did things halfway. Agnes found me a little later, wandering the hall like a lost puppy. He's in his study, she said, pointing to a big set of double doors down the hall. Third on the left. Just knock. The study smelled like old leather and nice cigars. It was all dark wood and shelves packed to the ceiling with books in different languages. Dante was at this huge desk, with papers all over it, a phone to his ear. He was speaking Italian so fast, and his voice sounded sharp, dangerous. But the second he saw me standing in the doorway, everything about him changed. He ended the call right in the middle of a sentence. Elena! He stood up and came around the desk with that smooth predator's walk that always made my heart beat a little faster. How are you feeling? Like I was used for a pincushion, I told him, but I'm alive. Thanks to my doctor, he said, and your own strength. He just watched me for a moment with this intensity that was unnerving, taking in the new clothes, the way I was holding myself to protect my back. They fit well. I started to say he shouldn't have, but he just held up a hand. We've already agreed I pay my debts. Clothes are just a small part of it. He pointed to a leather chair. Sit, please. We need to discuss what's next. I sat down carefully, feeling his eyes on me the whole time, watching my every move. You said last night wasn't an accident. It wasn't, he said, sitting back down. But he ignored the papers and kept his focus completely on me. The woman who dropped the tray, Sophie, she's worked at that restaurant for 3 years without a single problem. Last night she got a phone call a half hour before her shift. People said she was nervous after. Then the accident happened right when my attention was split. His jaw got tight. Someone paid her to create a diversion. The glass was supposed to cause a panic, to draw my security away from Matteo. They just never planned on you. My throat felt so dry. Who would want to hurt a child? A lot of people want to hurt me, Elena. And Matteo is the easiest way to do it. He leaned back then, and for the first time, I saw how tired he really was. I have enemies in my business. Rivals who think killing my son would weaken me, send some sort of message, or even start a war, and they're not wrong. He didn't finish the thought, but the look on his face told me everything I needed to know about what would have happened. And Sophie? I asked. She's been questioned, he said. She claims some man threatened her daughter if she didn't do it. We're looking for him now. The way he said it told me that man's future was going to be short and painful. But that's not your problem. Your problem is that by getting involved, you've become a part of this. The people behind this know you interfered. They know who you are, and they're going to wonder why a waitress would risk her life for my boy. Because it was the right thing to do, I said, and I could hear the frustration in my own voice. Not everything is a plan, a strategy. I remember he had this way of cutting in, so softly you'd almost miss it. He told me that my own kindness was the most dangerous thing about me in a world that ran on cold calculation. It made me a wild card. He settled on the word, valuable. The way it landed felt like I was being priced at an auction, and it made my skin crawl. So I asked him flat out what that made me. A captive? Someone he needed to keep quiet? He just corrected me, Dante, and said I could be whatever I wanted, so long as I was under his watch until things were safe. How long is that? I asked. His smile could have cut glass. As long as it takes. A knock saved me from having to reply. It was Marco, his face a grim mask, barging right in. Boss, there's a problem. The Calabrazzi family wants a sit-down. About what happened. In a heartbeat, Dante changed. It was like watching a statue come to life, but one carved from ice and fury, not warmth. The man who had gently buttoned my shirt was gone. His voice was cold enough to put out a fire. Tonight, he commanded. Neutral territory. They're trying to say they're innocent, looking for a truce before this gets out of hand. How convenient, he said, his movements sharp as he put on his suit jacket. The warehouse at 8. Take all the usual measures. His eyes then found me. And double the security here at the house. Nobody gets within 100 yards of Elena or Matteo, not without my say-so. Marco paused, glancing my way. Boss, maybe we should take her somewhere else. They don't know about her, Dante said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Not yet, and that's how it's staying. She's safest right here, where I can be sure of it. When Marco was gone, the air felt heavy with everything we weren't saying. I finally managed to speak. You're actually going to see the people who might have just tried to kill your son. No, he corrected me. I'm going to see the people who want me to think they didn't. It was a chilling distinction. He walked around his desk until he was standing right in front of me, so close I had to look up. You'll stay inside today. Matteo won't stop asking for you. You could go see him. Agnesa will show you where the playroom is. It wasn't a request, but I found myself nodding. And while I'm gone tonight, he continued, you will be locked in this house with more guards than a president, and you will have to trust me. He reached up, his touch on my jaw so surprisingly gentle it almost hurt. I won't allow anything to hurt you, Elena. You protected my boy. Now you're mine to protect. That word, mine. It hung in the air between us, part promise, part warning, and I couldn't seem to look away. I was completely caught in his gaze. I'm not yours, I whispered, but the words sounded weak even to my own ears. Not yet, he agreed, his thumb brushing my bottom lip so slowly it stole my breath. But you will be. The second you shielded Matteo, you sealed your fate with me. The only thing left to decide is when you'll finally stop fighting it. And with that, he was gone. He left me standing there, the scent of him in the air and his words wrapping around my chest like chains, squeezing the air and my freedom away. An hour later, Matteo found me in a playroom that looked like a toy store had exploded. He came at me with all the force a 5-year-old can, and I did my best to catch him without hurting my back. You're here, he shouted, his little hands cupping my face. Papa said you were staying. Are you staying forever? Can you read me a story? Do you have a favorite dragon? I have 17 of them. Do you want to see? That pure, innocent happiness was like a soothing balm on the darkness of this place. I felt a real smile spread across my face for the first time in what felt like ages. Show me all of them, I told him, and he eagerly pulled me over to his collection. We spent that whole afternoon making towers from blocks and staging huge wars between his little plastic dragons and knights. Matteo was a little chatterbox, telling me all about his school, his friends, and his nonna in Italy, who sent him cookies that he swore tasted like sunshine. He asked about my life, with that directness only kids have. I found myself carefully curating my past, spinning my lonely life into a story that was gentle enough for his young ears. Do you have a mommy? He asked out of the blue, and the question landed like a stone in my chest. No, sweetie, my mom passed away when I was little. Mine too, he said, his voice suddenly quiet. She went to heaven. Papa gets really sad when I ask about her. He leaned into my side, so careful around my bandages. But you're here now. You could be my mommy for a little bit. My throat closed up. Oh, Matteo, I'm only here for a little while. Papa said you're staying as long as you need to, he cut in with perfect kid logic. And I need you to stay forever. You saved me, and you're nice, and you smell like cookies, even though Agnesa said you haven't been in the kitchen. It's weird, but I like it. I hugged him as best I could. This sweet boy, stuck in this mess through no choice of his own. And in that moment, I understood why a man like Dante would burn down the world for him. I even understood why I hadn't thought twice about diving onto that broken glass. Some people just need protecting. Matteo was one of them. The scary part was wondering if I'd get burned up by the Moretti family's darkness before I ever had a chance to get away. As Matteo drifted off to sleep on my shoulder, clutching a toy dragon, I stared out the window. The grounds were perfect, beautiful, and crawling with men in fancy suits with guns. It was a gilded cage, no doubt about it. But the scariest thing, my dear, was that I wasn't so sure I wanted to fly away anymore. Night settled over the estate, and you could feel the tension in the air. I had tucked Matteo in an hour before, after 3 stories about knights and dragons finally did the trick. His little hand had held mine until the very end. Agnes had to gently pry me away, promising she would watch over him with a warmth that was clearly genuine. So there I was, in a room that wasn't mine, looking out as Dante's cars got ready to leave. I could spot him easily, even from far away. He was taller and moved with a deadly grace you see in predators. He was dressed all in black, which somehow made him seem even more menacing, like a shadow brought to life. He must have felt me watching, because he looked right up. Our eyes locked across the courtyard, and even through the glass, I felt the intensity of his stare like a physical thing. He gave me a single, slight lift of his hand. It wasn't a wave. It was a silent promise that he'd be back. Then he slipped into a big armored car and was gone, leaving me with a pounding heart and the feeling that this night was going to change everything. I tried to keep my mind busy. I wandered the parts of the house I was allowed in, always aware of the security cameras and the guards posted here and there. The library drew me in. It had these incredible windows that looked out onto softly lit gardens, and shelves just packed with books. I found a worn book of poetry, Neruda. The spine looked like it had been opened 1,000 times. I had just gotten comfortable in a big leather chair when my phone buzzed. My old, cracked thing. I had no idea how it even had a signal in this fortress. The number was blocked. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me hit accept. Hello? At first, there was just silence. Then this slow, heavy breathing. Who is this? I asked, and was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. The girl who played Hero. The voice was a man's, but it was all twisted and electronic. You should have kept your head down, little waitress. Now you're a problem. A chill went right through me. I have no idea what you're talking about. You took a dive for Dante Moretti's kid. A very noble, very foolish move. There was a pause. Has he told you what we do with problems in our line of work? They get erased, Elena Santos. They just stop existing. And all of Moretti's men won't be able to save you when you become more trouble than you're worth. The line clicked dead. I just sat there, frozen, the phone shaking in my hand. Neruda's poems were completely forgotten. They knew who I was. They had my number. They could get to me even here. Dante's promise to protect me suddenly felt very thin. How could he stop a threat he didn't even see coming? The door flew open so fast I almost screamed. It was Marco, his face all business. Miss Santos, with me, now. What is it? Is Mateo all right? The boy's fine. We have an issue. Let's go. His hand was on the gun at his side, and just like that, the danger wasn't just a voice on the phone anymore. He led me down hallways I'd never seen, down stairs that seemed to go deep into the ground. The fancy lights gave way to bare bulbs, the walls turned to concrete. I realized we were in some kind of panic room. He brought me into a space that was like a command hub, full of security monitors and communications gear. 3 other guards were already there, weapons out. Marco placed me right in the middle of it all, standing in front of me like a shield, standing right there, between me and the only exit. What is going on? I asked, my fear quickly turning to frustration. Where is Dante? The whole meeting was a setup, Marco said, his eyes glued to the screens. It wasn't the Calibers. Someone used their name to get the boss alone. He added, We've lost the convoy. My stomach dropped. Lost them? What's that even mean? It means they're making a move tonight. And honey, you're the bait. He finally turned to me, and I saw real worry on his scarred face. How'd they get your number, Miss Santos? I don't know. I've had it for years. It's not... Then I remembered. Someone called me 10 minutes ago. Knew my name, knew about Mateo. They called me a problem that needed to be erased. Marco's jaw set like stone. Your phone. Hand it to me now. I gave it to him, my hands shaking, as he popped the battery out like he'd done it 1,000 times. They were on you, he said. Probably got in after you gave your info at the hospital, or maybe from the restaurant's records. He looked at another guard. Sweep the house. If they had her phone, who knows what else they've got. Those next few minutes felt like an eternity. I stared at the monitors, trying to understand what I was seeing. Gates, gardens, the long, quiet driveway. It all looked so peaceful, but the air in that room was thick with tension. These were men waiting for a fight. Then, on one screen, a flicker of movement. A shadow appeared at the edge of the property, then another. They moved like soldiers, sticking to the dark spots, trying to fool the cameras, but they weren't good enough. Marco's system was top of the line. It picked them up in infrared. South perimeter breach, a guard said. 4 of them, armed and moving toward the house. Where's Mateo? My voice was thin with panic. He's in the safe room. Reinforced steel, biometric locks. They'd need C4 to get in, and we'd have them down before they got near. Marco was typing, talking into his headset in Italian so fast I couldn't keep up. But they aren't going for Mateo, he realized. They're coming here. They know you're here. How could they possibly know that? Because somebody on the inside told them. Marco's face turned to ice. We've got a mole. Just then the lights died. Red emergency lights flickered on, casting these long, creepy shadows. I heard yelling, the pop 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 of gunfire far off, and then Marco's hand was on my arm, pulling me to another door. We're moving you, he said. Stay right with me, and if I say run, you just run. Got it? I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. The door opened to a tunnel, a real underground tunnel, and we were off and running. Marco was ahead of me, 2 guards behind, our feet just echoing on the concrete. The gunfire sounded closer now, right above us, and the sharp smell of smoke was starting to drift down. How long till Dante's here? I managed to gasp out. 10 minutes out, maybe less, if he's running every red light in the city, which he is. Marco yanked me around a corner to another door, this one needing his handprint and his eye to open. But honey, 10 minutes is a lifetime in a gunfight. We stepped into a garage full of black armored cars, all ready to go. Marco pointed me to an SUV, but before we could even take a step, the main entrance just exploded, sending concrete and metal flying. 3 men appeared out of the smoke, guns up, and they had that look. The cold, empty look of people who did this for a living. Marco and his men started firing right back. The noise in there was deafening, bouncing off the walls until I felt like my head would split. I couldn't even think. Get in the car, Marco yelled, shoving me so hard I stumbled toward the SUV, my back screaming as I pulled the door open. A hand grabbed my arm, but it was the wrong hand, the grip all wrong, too hard, too vicious. I turned and saw a man with dead eyes pressing a gun to the side of my head. Stop shooting or she's dead, he shouted. The gunfire stopped on a dime. Marco just stood there, frozen, his gun up but completely useless. The look on his face was pure murder. You don't want to do this, he warned. You have no idea what Moretti will do if you hurt her. Moretti's a dead man, or he will be, the man said, his voice flat. And this one is worth more to us alive. She's our way out of this whole mess. Didn't count on the Moretti heir having a bodyguard. Now did we? The gun pushed harder into my temple. Drop your weapons, all of you, or I'll redecorate this place with her brains. I'd never seen Marco hesitate before, but for a second, I saw it in his eyes. He was torn. He knew what Dante would want. Save me, no matter what. But he was also a soldier. Do it, I whispered. Marco looked at me. Miss Santos. Do it, I said, my voice cracking. I am not dying for a little bit of pride. Drop them. His gun clattered to the floor, and the others followed. The man holding me actually smiled, the kind of smile you see on someone who knows they've already won. Smart girl. Now, you and I are going for a little walk. You try any of that heroic nonsense again, I'll put a bullet in your knee and drag you. Understand? I nodded, and he started pulling me back toward the blown-out entrance. I met Marco's eyes one last time, and I saw a promise in them. We'll find you. Then I was yanked out into the smoke and the night. There was a van waiting, its engine humming. 2 more men were inside, and they just threw me into the back like a piece of luggage. My head hit the floor so hard I saw stars. The door slammed shut, and the van took off. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the leader on the phone. "We've got the girl, Moretti's new little pet. Tell the boss we're bringing her to the warehouse." He paused. "Yeah, the one by the docks, the place we were supposed to meet him." Then a cold laugh. "Let's find out what his son's little savior is really worth." Lying there on the cold metal, my back on fire, I finally understood what Dante meant about debts. He owed me for Matteo. But now, I had just become a debt for him. I was a weakness, something his enemies could use against him. The real question was, would he think I was worth the price, or was I just another problem he needed to make disappear? The van turned so sharply I slammed into the wall, and a fresh wave of pain shot through my back. But I didn't make a sound. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. I decided right then, if I was going to die, it wouldn't be as some helpless victim. It would be as the woman who threw herself on broken glass for a little boy. And maybe, just maybe, in the strange, dark world I'd found myself in, that would be enough. Even if no one remembered my name. That warehouse smelled of old oil and the sea. You could just feel the history in the concrete, all the deals, good and bad, that had gone down there. They tied me to a chair right in the middle of that huge, empty space. The knots were tight, professional, and they left me with one guard while the others got ready for Dante's arrival. Because we all knew he was coming. The only unknown was if he was coming to rescue me, or just to clean up his mess. "You're pretty calm," the guard noted, lighting a cigarette by a rusty pillar. He couldn't have been much older than his mid-20s, with a scar cutting through one eyebrow. Most folks would be crying their eyes out by now. "Would that help?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. He thought about it for a second. "No, but it'd be more fun to watch." "Sorry to disappoint you." A little smile touched his lips. "You really jump on that glass for the Moretti kid? That wasn't just some story?" "It wasn't a story. It was just what you do." I tried to shift, and a sharp pain shot up my back. I could feel the warmth of blood seeping through my sweater where the stitches had torn. "He's 5 years old," I said. "He shouldn't have to pay for what his father does." "None of us should," the guard said, his voice quiet, and I saw something haunted in his eyes. "But we do. That's just the way it is." He took a long drag from his cigarette. "Look, for what it's worth, I told them this was a bad idea. Moretti doesn't make deals when it's about his boy. He'll come in here like the wrath of God, and we're all gonna pay." "Then why are you still here?" I asked. "Because I'm already dead," he said, crushing the cigarette out with his boot. "We all are, the day we signed up for this. But maybe you're not. Maybe if you're smart, you'll tell Moretti everything. Names, faces, all of it. Might be the only thing that gets you out of here alive." Before I could even answer, the main doors just exploded inward. This wasn't a quiet, sneaky entrance. This was someone announcing his arrival, making sure everyone knew he was there. Dante Moretti walked into that warehouse with a dozen armed men. Even from clear across the room, I could feel the anger coming off him like heat from a furnace. His suit jacket was torn. There was blood on his shirt. I couldn't tell if it was his or someone else's, but he moved with this terrifying purpose. Every step was deliberate, dangerous. His eyes locked on me right away, and the look on his face just stole my breath. It wasn't relief, not yet. It was ownership. It was a look that said, "Mine. And you dared to touch what is mine." The man who'd put the gun to my head, their leader, stepped out of the shadows. He was older, with the kind of confidence that comes from surviving a long time in that life. "Moretti, glad you could make it." "Russo." Dante's voice was so cold it could have turned your blood to ice. "You have 30 seconds to let her go." Before he'd burn everything I loved. You know, he was always so theatrical. He told Dante his father would be ashamed. Russo tried to smile, but his eyes were cold. He said I was mostly fine, though his men had been a bit rough. He apologized, if you can believe it. 20 seconds, he said. He wanted to trade me for information on the Calabresi family's business at the port, said everyone could just walk away. 15 seconds. Dante, your grandfather, he didn't even flinch. He just told Russo that he was counting his own life in those seconds. Russo thought he was bluffing, that he wouldn't risk me. Then a shot cracked through the air. The young guard with the scarred brow, the one who'd been smoking, just dropped. He'd made the mistake of reaching for his gun. A fraction of a second too early. Dante hadn't even looked his way. His gaze was fixed on Russo. The gun was just suddenly in his hand, smoke ghosting in the cold. 10 seconds, he said. He made it clear that wasn't a warning. It was a demonstration of what came next. The warehouse just exploded into motion then. Everyone had a weapon out, and there I was, tied to a chair in the middle of it all. I remember how the ropes dug into my skin as I tried to shrink away, but there was nowhere to go. That madman Russo then dragged my chair back, using me as a human shield. He yelled that Dante would get me killed in the crossfire. But Dante just smiled, a truly terrifying sight, all teeth and menace. Because, he said, you're using a woman who saved my son's life as a bargaining chip. And with that, you signed your own death warrant. The only question now is how many men die with you. One of Russo's men got nervous, but was quickly silenced. Russo pushed the gun to my temple, just like before, and I felt that cold metal on my skin again. He threatened to kill me right there if everyone didn't stand down. Time just stood still. I watched Dante's face, saw him weighing every angle. I wondered, right then, what I was worth to him, and his expression gave me the answer. Everything. You won't shoot her, Dante said, his voice becoming strangely calm. Because the second you do, all deals are off. There's no mercy, no quick death. I'll keep you alive for weeks, Russo, he promised. And he would get creative. He'd make him watch as he took apart everything he had ever built, everyone he loved. He knew about his daughter Sofia in Milan. He said he'd send her recordings of her father's screams. He knew about his mother in Naples, too. He'd make sure she died knowing her son begged for an end he'd never grant. Am I bluffing? Dante asked, and then he took a step forward. His men moved with him, perfectly in sync. It was the first time I saw that kind of absolute trust. He told Russo he had a reputation for a reason, that when he promised pain, he always delivered. He asked him if the information was really worth everything he held dear. I felt Russo's hand, the one holding the gun to my head, begin to tremble. His confident act was cracking. You see, he'd made a terrible mistake. He assumed Dante would choose information over a woman he'd only known for 2 days. He didn't understand that for men like Dante, some debts are about more than just business. They're about honor. Stand down, Russo finally choked out, his voice thin and defeated. The clatter of weapons being lowered filled the silence. Russo took the gun from my head and put his hands up. She's yours, he said. The information wasn't worth this. In a flash, Dante was kneeling in front of me. After all that terrifying power, his hands were so gentle as he worked at the ropes. Are you hurt? His voice was deep and quiet, meant only for me. I told him my stitches had torn, but that I was okay. As the ropes fell away, he helped me to my feet, steadying me when my knees gave out. I know everything, Elena, he said, and they'll pay for every second they made you afraid. He turned back to Russo, and I could feel him change, from the man who freed me back to the monster who ruled that world. He told his man, Marco, to take me to the car. No, I said, the word just popping out. Dante's head snapped back to me. I want to see this. I want to see who you really are. A look of surprise crossed his face, maybe even a little respect. He told me I didn't need to. Yes, I do, I insisted, straightening up despite the searing pain, despite every part of me screaming at me to leave. You told me I'm part of this world now, I said. So let me see what that means. The whole truth. He just looked at me for a long moment. You could almost see the thoughts turning in his head. Finally, he gave a small nod. Stay behind me. He turned back to Russo, his voice ringing with authority. He said that touching what was his would normally mean a slow, painful death, an education for others. Russo's face turned ashen. Moretti, please, he begged. But Dante just held up a hand. He said that Russo's one saving grace was being smart enough to back down. That choice had earned him a sliver of mercy. He had to leave the city that night. Everything he owned was forfeited. Every single penny was now Dante's. His family would be left alone, but only because I was safe. Then Dante stepped closer, his voice a low promise of something worse than dying. He told Russo that if he ever saw him again, if he ever even heard his name, he would forget all about mercy. Understood? He asked. Understood, Russo whispered, a broken man. And then they were gone, scrambling away like rats. The silence that fell was almost as loud as the chaos before it. Dante turned to me, and I could see the bone-deep exhaustion in his eyes. The adrenaline was gone, leaving behind a man who looked like he'd aged a decade in one night. You should have gone to the car, he said softly. Probably. I felt myself sway, and he was there in an instant to catch me. I told him I needed to see, to truly understand. And do you? He asked. His arms were around me, so careful of my injuries, and I just let myself lean on him. I told him I understood he was a man who kept his promises, who valued loyalty above all else, and who would burn down the world for his son. I looked up at this handsome, terrifying man and said, I also understood he thought I was worth protecting, even if I couldn't figure out why. Because you jumped, he said, so simply, his hand gently touching my face. He said in a world where everyone calculated their every move, I had acted with my heart. How could he not protect someone capable of that kind of selfless courage? I remember whispering that I wasn't brave, just terrified. Of him, of his world, of the fact that I didn't want to leave it. He told me something I'll never forget. Brave and terrified aren't mutually exclusive. Often they're the same thing. Then he offered me a way out. A new life, safe, far away. He was completely serious. I could have walked away then and there, but the thought of going back to being invisible, to a life where I didn't matter, felt like I was suffocating. What if I want to stay? I heard myself ask. Not because I was scared, but because for the first time, I felt like I was actually seen by someone. What if I want this? Want you? He finished my sentence for me. And the hope in his voice was so raw. He said, because I want you, Elena. I've wanted you since you threw yourself onto that glass. He told me I had become essential to him, but he needed me to be sure. He warned me his world was not a kind place, and that once you were truly in it, there was no going back. I thought about my cold, lonely apartment and my job where I was just a ghost. Then I thought of Matteo's little hand in mine, and Dante's fierce gaze that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. Of finally being necessary. I'm sure, I said, and I had never meant anything more. I choose this. I choose you. The look on Dante's face, it was pure relief. And I remember the look on his face, a mix of ownership and something I couldn't name then. He said, You're mine, Elena. And you know what? In that moment, I was. He kissed me right there, with all his men watching, the air still thick with what had just happened. It was a strange first kiss, tasting of danger and promises. A future I never knew I wanted, suddenly felt like the only one. When he said, Let's go home, it hit me. Not my house, but home. It felt right, like I was finally where I was supposed to be. Funny, isn't it? How one little moment, Seeing a child in trouble can set your whole life on a new path, like two stars pulled into the same orbit. As he guided me to the car, his arm felt so solid around me. I gave that warehouse one last look. It was the place where the old me, the quiet little waitress nobody ever noticed, just ended. And someone new began. It cost me plenty in fear and blood, and any sense of normal I had left. But when he tucked me into the car and took my hand, I knew deep down I'd do it all over again. Sometimes the safest places aren't what you think they are, and sometimes the people you're told to fear are the ones who save you. The debts we owe for kindness, for saving a child, you carry those with you, always. Fast forward 3 months, and there I was, in what he started calling our study. I was watching the snow fall, thinking how much had changed. My scars on my back had turned into these faint silvery marks. I used to hate them, but over the years they became reminders, not of shame, but of courage. I could hear Matteo laughing somewhere downstairs, probably making a mess with Agnese in the kitchen. He had started calling me Elena Mama, and oh, every single time, my heart felt like it would just pop. Then Dante came up behind me, his arms so gentle around me, always mindful of those old scars. He rested his chin on my shoulder and asked what I was thinking. I told him how I used to think I just wanted to be invisible, to get by. But I realized what I really wanted was to be truly seen, but only by him. He chuckled, asking if he was the right person, but I could hear he was serious underneath it all. I turned around to face him, looked right into his eyes and said, "You were always the only one, Dante. The one I ran toward the fire for, and the one who pulled me out." He sealed that with a kiss, one that felt like it would last a lifetime. Outside, the snow was covering everything, making the world quiet and white. But inside our home, the one we built out of chaos and hope, everything was warm and safe. It's funny, I thought I was just saving a child that day, but I see now I was saving myself too. Our story. It wasn't a simple fairy tale with a happy ending. It was messy and real, full of dark corners and bright moments. It was woven with things that shouldn't go together, but for us, they did. And looking back on it all now, I can honestly say I wouldn't change a thing. Not a single scar. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.